What would you do if you saw a giant creature tapping from under the ice? In the dead of winter 1994, a woman named Lena was ice fishing alone on a silent, snow-covered lake in Idaho. No birds, no wind, just the sound of her own breath. Then, thump, thump, thump. A deep, rhythmic sound echoing from under the ice. Not a crack, not a falling branch. It was deliberate, like someone trapped beneath, begging to be seen. When she knelt down and looked through the ice, what she saw wasn't a bear. It wasn't human either. A massive, fur-covered shape. Shoulders like a linebacker, arms too long, fingers human-like, and its eyes filled with fear, with awareness. Most would have run. Lena didn't. She cut through the ice, and what emerged would save her life. Not once, but again, weeks later, buried in a deadly avalanche. This isn't a story about monsters. It's about connection, across species, across pain, across silence. It's based on a real journal found decades later. A woman's record of her encounters with something most of us are too afraid to believe in. Bigfoot, but not as you've ever heard before. So tell me, where in the world are you watching from right now? And what's your name, dear listener? Because stories like this, of trust, survival, and ancient beings that walk the edge of our world, deserve to be shared. If this touched you, give it a like. Subscribe, and let's build a warm little corner of the internet for those who still believe the forest has secrets. From me to you, wherever you are, thank you for being here. This one's for the believers. The ice had thickened more than usual this winter, curling like glass across the still surface of Priest Lake. Trees bowed beneath the weight of frozen mist, and the sky hung low, a dull pewter that never truly gave way to day. No birds, no breeze, just a silence so tight it pressed against Lena Brookfield's ears like altitude. She zipped her parka tighter and adjusted her canvas bag, the one still patched from the Ruby Falls hiking trip back in '87. The ice beneath her boots gave a dull creak, then settled. It was always like that. Threatening, holding. She walked slowly across the lake's frozen belly, eyes on the red flag of her tip-up near the center. Her line hadn't moved. But she didn't come for fish anymore. She came for forgetting, or maybe remembering. Maybe it didn't matter which. It had been almost 4 years since Earl and Ruby vanished into this same lake. One sharp gust, one wrong turn of the rudder, and the boat capsized. Lena had been down the shoreline, packing up their lunch. She'd heard Earl shout once. By the time she reached the edge, only the boat seat remained, floating, empty. The search dragged for weeks. Drones, divers, dogs. But winter had returned before the lake could give up what it took. She never found them. Her hands fumbled with the ice auger, and she twisted the crank, boring down until the screw broke through with a satisfying splash. She cleared the hole with the heel of her glove. Steam coiled up from the water like breath. Minutes passed, then hours. The flag never twitched. The sky grew dimmer, like a lamp flickering out behind thick wool. She lit the old lantern and tucked it beside her on the sled. Something about that orange glow kept the darkness at arm's length, like it remembered Earl's voice or Ruby's squeal when the fish bit. The flame hissed and flickered. She closed her eyes, and then, up, a muffled thud, almost like a heartbeat underfoot. She opened her eyes. Thup, thup. It wasn't the ice shifting. It came from beneath. Her breath stilled. She leaned forward, pressing her mittened hand to the edge of the hole. Silence. Then again. Thup. The lantern danced. The ice groaned. She stood slowly, every nerve in her body tensed. 2 paces to the west, the ice had gone glassy, clearer than it ever should be in late January, like some force had polished it smooth. She stepped toward it, her boots crunching frost. There, beneath her feet, movement. Her stomach flipped. It was a shadow at first, long, twisting. Then, a shape. A massive torso, shoulders, a face, pressed just beneath the ice like some nightmare fossil coming awake. She stumbled backward, boots sliding. Her breath caught. The thing moved again, its arm reaching. One hand, enormous and curled, flailed weakly beneath the frozen glass. Its other hand, clenched against its chest. She wanted to run. She wanted to turn and bolt straight back to the shore, let the thing drown or sleep or whatever it was doing. But she didn't. Instead, her hands reached for the auger again. She fell to her knees. She had no idea why. Each turn of the crank sent a blade of panic through her ribs. Water surged upward from the new hole, licking the edge of the widening gap. Her breath fogged the lantern glass. Then a crack, a shatter. The weakened surface gave way, and black water exploded upward like a gasp from the lake itself. Then the arm lunged through. A hand the size of a dinner plate gripped her wrist. She screamed, not in fear, but in something worse. A memory. That grip, that impossible strength. Like the time Earl grabbed her from the dock after Ruby leapt too close to the edge. That same desperate pull of survival. And then they fell, together. Her knees slammed the edge of the ice, and the cold hit like a fist. The creature half emerged, its shoulders above the surface, steam rising off its fur like smoke. It collapsed forward, its weight slamming her chest, pinning her hard. Her lungs burned. She clawed at the ice. The smell of earth, musk, wet fur filled her nose. Then, it stopped moving. The creature's body slumped, breathing shallow. She stared. It had a face. Not a snout, not some gorilla-like muzzle, but a wide, flat face. Human and not. Broad brow, high cheekbones. Eyes sealed shut under thick black lashes frozen into icicles. Its fur clung in dripping clumps to its back. A braided leather cord hung from its neck, and on it, an old, polished bone. Worn smooth, shaped like an arrowhead. Her heart caught in her throat. That wasn't an animal. That was someone's child. Or father, or... She gritted her teeth, dragged herself free, and dug her boots into the ice. She started pulling. Every inch hurt. The creature was dense, like hauling a waterlogged tree. She got it to the edge of her sled and rolled it on with a grunt. Her spine screamed. Her hands bled inside her gloves. The ice groaned again, but held. She pulled and pulled, her footprints trailing red as the sled scraped behind her. The walk back to the ice tent felt endless. Inside, she kicked open the flap, shoved the cot aside, and lit the camp heater until it glowed like an angry coal. She wrapped the creature in every spare blanket she had. It didn't move. She knelt. Her breath shook as she peeled off a glove and pressed 2 fingers beneath its chin. Cold skin, a faint pulse. She adjusted the blanket. Then, without realizing it, she reached for the old first aid kit. She didn't know what she was doing, only that she had to do something. She whispered to it. Stories, nonsense, fragments of her life, of Earl, of Ruby, of winters past. She didn't know if it heard. The wind outside howled, scraping frost against the canvas. Inside, only the steady hiss of the heater. Then, a sound, low, deep. A rumble from the creature's chest, like thunder under earth. She froze. The thing twitched. And then its arm moved, slow, deliberate, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. Right on the spot where it always ached in the cold. She gasped, not from pain, but from the precision of it. The eyes opened. Amber, intelligent, tired. It looked at her. Not through her, at her. She didn't breathe. Then slowly it sat up. Tall, taller than any man she'd ever seen. Its head scraped the ceiling of the tent. It swayed, chest heaving. But it stood, and then it turned. Looked through the flap of the tent, past the trees, toward the bend of the lake, toward the place where the boat went under. She swallowed. How did it know? It didn't stay. It lowered its hand from her shoulder and stepped into the night. She followed it to the edge of the lake, watched as its shadow vanished among the snow-draped pines. Its shape melted into darkness like smoke curling into sky. She didn't speak, didn't wave. She just stood there. The wind had eased. The lake was silent again. She turned and walked back toward the cabin, and when she reached the stairs, her breath caught. There, on the bottom step, was a frozen print. 5 thick fingers splayed across the wood. Ice crystallized in the grooves like frost etched by hand. She knelt, touched it. The same size, the same shape as the one that had gripped her wrist. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 4 years, she didn't feel alone. The wind had died down by midnight, but the silence that replaced it felt heavier. Inside the small ice tent, the air hung thick with damp wool, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of lantern smoke. Lena crouched by the cot, tucking the last blanket around the creature's chest, careful not to press too hard against its ribs. They moved when it breathed, just barely. Shallow, irregular. She watched the rise and fall of its chest, counted seconds between each movement. Her gloves were off. Her fingertips shook. Not from the cold, though it was cold, but from something else. The kind of tremble you get after a car crash, or waking up from a dream that didn't feel like dreaming. There were no instructions for this in any nursing manual. Nothing in her years working trauma shifts at Bonner General could have prepped her for the moment a soaking wet beast the size of a grizzly bear reached up through a hole in the ice and gripped her wrist like it knew her name. She moved closer, gently placed the back of her hand beneath its jaw again, checking. Still warm, still a pulse, slow as sap. She looked at the face. It wasn't sleeping. That much she knew. It was recovering. Somewhere between barely alive and half elsewhere. The kind of space people sometimes floated in after losing too much blood or too much time. She'd seen soldiers return from war like this. Men who didn't speak for days. Children who blinked but didn't cry. She leaned her back against the tent wall, drew her knees to her chest, and exhaled. "I never learned how to say goodbye right," she whispered, not sure who she was talking to. Not to Earl, not to Ruby, maybe not even to myself. The lantern buzzed softly. She tilted her head, let her eyes drift to the old zipper pouch she kept near the heater. Inside were the photos. Dog-eared, fading. Ruby at age 10 in a red flannel coat, mouth open mid-laugh. Earl, holding up a trout the size of her arm, grinning like he was 20 years younger. "You know," she said, half laughing under her breath, "I used to talk to their pictures, but lately I just talk into the quiet. I guess I needed someone to hear it." The tent fabric swayed. No wind, just the weight of breath and memory. She looked at the creature again. Steam rose gently from the wet fur. A drop of water fell from the tip of one dark finger. The cord around its neck shifted slightly, the bone pendant catching the lantern light. It looked worn, loved even, like something kept for meaning, not survival. She reached for the warm compress and gently pressed it beneath its arm, mimicking field hypothermia protocols. Then she checked the feet, massive, padded like an elephant's, but more human in their articulation. The nails were thick and dark. One looked chipped. Frostbite hadn't set in. Not yet. Suddenly a sound vibrated through the tent floor. Low, deep. It wasn't a growl. Not exactly. It was lower than speech, closer to a cello drawn slowly across a single string. A vibration more than a voice. She froze. The sound came again. A pulsing hum that made the lantern flicker and the ice beneath her boots tremble slightly. Then it stopped, and the creature stirred. Its fingers twitched, shoulders tensed. The head rolled slightly to the side, brow furrowing. She didn't move. Its chest expanded, then collapsed with a ragged exhale. And then, slowly, it opened its eyes. Amber, still, focused. They met hers. She swallowed. Tried to stay still, to not do anything that might startle it. But it didn't startle. Its gaze drifted down, taking in the layers of blankets, the heater, the tent walls. Then, back to her, and it moved. One arm slowly lifting. Its hand reached outward, not toward her face, or her throat, or anything that might threaten, but toward her shoulder. It hovered a moment, fingers flexing, then rested gently, right on the spot where her pain always flared in cold weather, right where the nerve damage had never healed after that ladder fall in '91, where Earl used to press his thumb and say, "Let me take that ache off you, Len." Her breath hitched. She didn't pull away. The hand was warm, not hot, just steady, present, anchored. They stayed like that for what felt like hours. No sound, no movement. Then, carefully, it pulled its arm back, sat upright. She instinctively scooted backward to give it room. It didn't stand yet. It looked at its own hands, flexed them, touched the cord at its chest like checking it was still there. Then it looked toward the tent door. She followed its gaze. Beyond that flap was the lake. And beyond that, the bend where Earl's boat went under. The place she'd never set foot on again since the day it all shattered. The creature rose, tall, nearly brushing the tent's peak, shoulders hunched slightly beneath the low ceiling. It paused, turned back toward her, looked, and in its eyes, she saw no panic, no savagery, just recognition, like it knew something about her. Or maybe had always known. It walked forward, unzipped the flap with a single movement of its thick fingers, and stepped out into the snow. She followed again, out into the night. The snow had softened, a dusting on top of the older crust. The lake lay still beneath moonlight, rippling gently where wind had broken the ice surface. The creature stopped at the edge of the trees, turned, looked once more. She stood on the threshold between light and dark, lantern casting long shadows across the snow. She didn't wave, didn't speak, only nodded. It nodded back, then vanished into the trees, as quiet as breath. She stood there long after it left, long after the wind returned, long after the snow began again. When she stepped back inside the tent, her eyes fell on the cot. The blanket still warm, the heater humming low. Her hand lifted unconsciously to her shoulder. Still tingling, she sat down, let herself feel the ache again. Not the physical kind. The other kind. The kind you don't name because naming it gives it permission to hollow you out. The kind you carry in the silent spaces of your day. When the coffee brews, when the fire crackles, when the lake doesn't speak. She stayed there until morning. And when she walked back to the cabin, the sky beginning to blush with soft gray, she paused at the top step. The handprint was still there. Frozen, unchanged. Only now, next to it, another, smaller, fainter, as if placed with intention. She didn't speak. She simply touched both prints, one large, one gentle. Then opened the door, stepped inside, lit the fire, made tea, and as the kettle sang and the flame licked the edge of the old iron stove, Lena Brookfield finally allowed herself to believe this wasn't madness. This wasn't a dream. Something had changed. Something ancient had stirred beneath the ice and reached out. And her hand, battered and calloused and aging, had reached back. The sun cracked through the clouds like it didn't want to. A weak light, pale and directionless, spilled down over the trees that still wore their coats of snow and silence. Mid-February and the Idaho panhandle had always been mean, but this year it felt personal. Ice in the soil, tension in the air, sky too quiet. Something in the mountains was holding its breath. Lena zipped her coat up to her throat and stepped into the crunch of half-melted snow. The trail she followed ran narrow and steep beside a half-frozen stream above the northwest ridge. It wasn't an official Forest Service path, just one of those old miner routes that twisted along the ridge like a scar. Her scar now, she figured. She carried her fishing gear again, not because she was hungry. She just needed the rhythm. Thread the line, bait the hook. Wait. When the ranger at the station warned her about avalanche risk, she'd nodded politely, thanked him, then tucked the pamphlet into her glove box without reading it. Not because she didn't care, but because caring didn't stop anything anymore. Her boots found purchase on the gritty ice slope, and she steadied herself on a fallen pine trunk. It had split mid-fall, hollowed out from within by beetles, now frozen stiff like a snapped femur. She stepped over it, slowly, On the bark, something odd. A smudge. Mud, maybe. But shaped like a crescent. Curved. Deliberate. She paused. Looked closer. The curve was dark, almost charred against the bark. Too high for boot scuff. Too neat for weather. She touched it with her glove. Still damp. Strange. Then above her, somewhere far off, a pop. Quick, sharp, like someone cracking a branch over their knee. Then another. Crack, snap, only longer, lower. Not a branch. Snow. Moving. She lifted her eyes. The ridgeline above shifted. Her gut clenched. The sound came again. But now it was a series, echoing across the basin. The mountain spoke in groans and splits. And then the high-pitched hiss of snow releasing. She turned, heart skipping. Her boots slipped slightly on the incline. Then it came, a wall of white. Pouring like liquid glass, soundless at first. Then roaring, as if the mountain had torn its lungs out and flung them downhill. She tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Her legs locked. Her voice didn't come. She dropped the gear and stumbled toward a cluster of trees, but the slope gave under her boots. Ice crumbled like sugar. The avalanche hit. She didn't feel it at first. Just the sudden loss of light. Then cold. Then nothing. Everything was gone. No sound. No up. No down. Just a crushing weight. Her arms pinned. Her face packed in snow. She couldn't open her mouth. The cold pressed into her ribs, like hands pushing from all sides. Her brain screamed to move, but her body didn't answer. This was it. It felt strangely familiar. The stillness, the dark, just like that day on the lake. The moment between hearing Earl's scream and realizing it was already too late. She saw Ruby's hair in the wind, the red stripe on her coat, the way she reached back from the bow of the boat to wave, eyes laughing, then gone. Lena's fingers curled inside her gloves. The snow didn't move. She stopped trying to breathe. Maybe this was the way it was supposed to end. Not with a bang, just with surrender. Her body could stay here, feed the land. Her story ending like so many others who came too close to the wild and didn't make it back. Then, something, a sound, like thunder moving underground. Or maybe footsteps. She strained to hear. Another vibration. Closer, snow shifting, heavy, then pressure. Right above her, she tried to blink. Then the snow broke, a rush of air and light. A hand, huge, dark, wet, digging, clawing, then touch. Her arm was yanked. Her chest cracked open with the first gasp of breath. Then more pulling. Her back scraped rock. Her lungs burned. She coughed. Then suddenly, sky. Blue sky, blinding, the roar of blood in her ears. And above her, a shape, dark against the light. Broad shoulders, matted fur, and eyes. She blinked hard. It wasn't a hallucination, it was him, the same figure from the ice. The being she'd pulled from the frozen lake 3 weeks before, now pulling her back. He crouched over her, steam rising from his body. His breath came in slow clouds, chest heaving. His fingers pressed her shoulder again. Same spot, same touch. Not just checking, recognizing. She stared up, lips cracked, lungs still clawing for air. He stood, turned, slammed both hands into the snow behind her, carved out more space, made sure she could move. Then he looked over the ridge, where the avalanche had torn a path wide as a freeway, where she would have been if that fallen tree hadn't slowed her, if she'd been 20 feet further. He turned back to her. Rain started falling then, light, icy, just enough to sting. He stood on the edge of the cleared snowfield, arms at his sides, fur dripping. The rain painted his silhouette silver. He didn't speak, didn't make a sound. She sat up slowly, chest aching, hands trembling. She looked at the way he stood. Not wild, not animal, more like a guard or a sentinel. Behind him, the slope glistened with broken snow, churned earth, uprooted saplings. The path of destruction clear. And she saw it. If she hadn't changed her route, if she hadn't paused at the tree, she would have been dead. She looked back toward the fallen pine. There, tucked against a lower branch, something bound in the needles. She stood slowly, feet unsteady. Walked toward it. A small bundle of dry reeds, braided, tight, woven like an offering. She picked it up with shaking hands. Still warm. She turned back, but he was already gone. No sound. Just a faint, steaming trail of prints fading into the trees. She held the bundle tighter. Didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside her shifted. Like a rusted lock cracking open. Like a door she forgot was even there. She stood for a long time under the gray sky, fingers numb around the braid, snow melting slowly into her boots. She didn't speak. There was nothing left to say, and somehow that was enough. The ice hadn't fully cracked yet, but it was changing. By the last week of February, lines had begun to thread across the surface of Priest Lake like veins under pale skin. The kind of fractures that don't make noise at first. They just spread, quietly, until one morning, a boot slips or a deer goes under. Lena knew the signs. She knew how to listen. Still, she went back. Not far. Just to the edge where the water shimmered blue beneath the thinner ice. The cabin was still warm from the morning's fire. She'd packed a thermos of coffee, a flannel blanket, and one small fish. Cleaned, gutted, still cold from the creek near the ridge. She placed it on the old flat rock near the slope where the trees curved inward like ribs. Not hidden, not displayed. Just there. Like a question. She didn't wait beside it. She returned to the cabin, made soup, read from an old poetry book she hadn't touched in years. Let the radio hum low in the background, soft enough not to intrude. Next morning she went out again. The fish was gone. No tracks, no drag marks in the snow. But something else had appeared in its place. 3 objects, neatly laid, not scattered, not random. An eagle feather, long, black-tipped, caught at the stem with a bit of moss. A piece of white-veined stone, smooth as soap. And a driftwood shard, thin and curved like it had once been part of something larger. They sat there like offerings, like a message. She stood in silence, staring. Then, slowly, she sat on the same rock, took off her gloves, picked up each piece in turn. The feather had weight. The stone was cool. The driftwood smelled faintly of smoke and sap. She didn't speak, but something inside her leaned forward. That evening, she gathered 3 river stones from the creek, washed them, dried them near the fire, then arranged them in a triangle beside the flat rock before she went in for the night. She didn't sleep deeply. Dreams came, strange, slow ones, of old trees walking, of music in a language she didn't know but somehow understood. At dawn, she went out again. The triangle was gone. In its place, the 3 stones had been rearranged into an arrow, pointing up the slope, toward the overlook, the one she hadn't walked to in years. Her stomach clenched. She almost turned away, almost went back inside, but she didn't. Instead, she packed a small satchel with water, gloves, the old bone-handled knife Earl gave her one Christmas, and the feather. Something told her it belonged there. The hike was shorter than she remembered. Maybe because the pain in her knees had gone dull, or maybe because the fear in her chest had quieted. By the time she reached the high bluff, the clouds had thinned, letting long spears of sun cut through the trees. From up here, the lake looked like a mirror, still frozen in most places. But near the center, you could see the lines again. And near the far edge, there was the spot, the one where it happened, where Earl's boat disappeared, where she stood and screamed and no one answered. She hadn't been up here since. The wind rose. She stood very still, arms crossed against the cold. Then she sat, took out the feather, laid it beside her on the stone ledge. Didn't cry, didn't speak. She just let herself be there. A sound behind her. She turned, but it was just the wind. Still, something had shifted. When she returned to the cabin, the front step had been cleared of snow. And beside the door, a small bundle of cedar twigs, bound with woven grass. She bent down, fingers brushing the bundle. It wasn't random. It wasn't left by chance. She opened the door slowly. The air inside felt different, warmer. not just from the fire, as if someone had stood there a moment ago, watching. She closed the door behind her, set the bundle on the mantel. The next day, 2 men showed up in a mud-splashed Chevy with Washington plates. She heard the engine long before it reached the turnoff. Watched them through the slit in the curtain as they got out. One was wiry and gray-bearded, the other young, heavy boots, wearing a camouflage jacket too new to be trusted. The third stayed in the truck, smoking. They didn't knock at first, just wandered. The older one pointed toward the lake. The younger one had a small VHS camcorder. She opened the door before they could circle back around. "Can I help you?" The older man smiled like a salesman, said they were amateur wildlife photographers. Something about documenting migration patterns. She didn't answer. Just watched the younger one scan the tree line with a long lens camera. "We heard stories," he said, "about noises out here, shapes in the snow." She folded her arms. "Most stories are just that," he shrugged. But the third man, still leaning against the truck, wasn't watching her. He was watching the trees. She didn't invite them in. They left after 10 minutes. But that night, the woods didn't feel the same. She walked the perimeter of the cabin just before sundown. Saw something. Small. Metal. A camcorder tripod half buried near the fire pit. Fresh boot prints nearby. And near the edge of the tree line, a small pile of wood stacked tightly against the wind. The logs were arranged like a windbreak. But on top of the pile, something else rested. A tight bundle of cattail reeds, braided. She stared at it for a long time, then took it inside. She lit the fire earlier than usual, checked the windows twice, but she wasn't afraid. Not exactly. More aware. The way you feel when someone walks behind you on a quiet street and never says a word. That night she left nothing on the rock. But when she woke up just before dawn and stepped out onto the porch, a new shape caught her eye. The firewood she'd stacked 2 days ago had been rearranged. Same logs, same pieces. But now they formed a low wall, semicircular, like arms around the cabin. A gesture, a warning, or maybe protection. She stepped closer and saw it. Woven into the top branch, 3 objects. Feather, stone, driftwood, laid together in the same order, like a language, like a name. She touched them one by one, her breath visible in the air, then turned slowly and looked out over the frozen lake. The light was just starting to rise. The sky behind the ridge burned pale gold, and somewhere out there, he was watching. Not stalking, not hiding, but present, keeping the line alive. She stepped back inside, fingers still cold. And for the first time in years, she whispered something she hadn't spoken since before Earl died. A prayer, not for protection, not for answers, but for understanding, for the bridge being built from silence, and how she'd carry it, piece by piece, from this world into whatever came next. The thaw came later than usual that spring. March dragged its feet through the hills of Coolin, letting snow linger in the gullies and shadowed corners of the woods. Lena had seen dozens of springs roll through Priest Lake, but this one was different. The melt felt slower, the air thick with waiting, the kind of waiting that sits behind your ribs and listens with you. She zipped her rain jacket all the way to her chin and tightened the straps on her backpack. It had rained all night, that kind of spring rain that doesn't roar, just taps and taps until it soaks everything to the bone. The clouds hadn't lifted. The light stayed flat, metallic. No sun, just mist clinging to tree bark like wet gauze. She was heading up into the West Ravine, the ridge above Murdoch's Gulch. A neighbor, if you could call someone 12 miles out a neighbor, had taken a fall on the ice a week earlier. Widow named Marlene, pushing 90, but too proud to ask for help. Lena packed soup, gauze, and a warm blanket. Not because anyone asked, just because it was what you do. Halfway up the old logging road, she paused. Something ahead looked wrong. A tree had fallen. But not just fallen, twisted. A massive pine, maybe 60 feet tall, had been wrenched at the base. Not cut, not broken by wind, twisted like someone had grabbed it by the trunk and spun. The splinters spiraled out in a helix. It lay across the trail, blocking the old route completely. She stopped, stared, then walked closer, boots sinking into the wet moss. Rain slicked the bark to a shine. There was no sound, only the soft hush of dripping needles and the muffled weight of her breath. She stood for a moment, then turned. There was an old animal trail that looped around the southern rise. Steep, slippery, but passable. She'd used it years ago when a washout took the main road. She adjusted her backpack, gritted her teeth, and started up the incline. It took her longer than she remembered. Her knees ached. The mud slid beneath her boots. Every root seemed to reach out and catch her toe. She pressed one hand to the hillside, dragging herself upward inch by inch. A crow called out once, far off, sharp. And then silence again. When she reached the plateau, she paused to breathe. Her lungs felt raw. The clouds hung even lower here. A faint thunder rumbled somewhere behind the eastern ridge. She didn't notice the sound at first, just the shift in air, like something pulling away. Then it came, a roar. Not wind, not thunder, water. She turned, saw it. A black wave tearing down the old path she would have taken. A flash flood. Fast, thick with debris. Chunks of ice, stones, logs, a river with no warning. She stood frozen. If she had gone the old route, she would have been caught in it. No time to run, no chance to climb. Her throat closed. Then, from across the gulch, a shape, standing on the rocks above the far ridge. Still, massive, the same towering figure. He stood in profile, his body framed by a line of shattered birches. Rain streamed down his fur, matting it to his chest. One arm hung at his side, the other cradled something. She squinted. Not something, someone. A smaller figure, clinging to his shoulder, head tucked beneath his jaw. A child, not human, but shaped like one. Small hands, short limbs, covered in thick fur, clinging tightly like a child to a father in a thunderstorm. Lena's heart kicked hard in her chest. The way the larger figure stood, he wasn't hiding. He was watching, guarding, and she realized he'd been there. He had warned her. The tree, twisted down across the old road, not by wind, not by age, but by him. To stop her, to save her. Her breath caught. The rain picked up again. She blinked, wiped water from her eyes. When she looked back, they were gone. Not a sound, not a trace, just the empty ridgeline and the soft rush of retreating water. She turned slowly, feet soaked, shoulders numb, and then, near her boot, a shape caught in the wet brambles. She crouched, pulled it free. A bundle of cattail, braided tight, threaded with bark, just like the ones before. But this one held something else. Tucked inside the weave, a thin cord, grass or fur. She held it in her palm, still warm, still damp. She didn't speak, didn't move for a long time. She just crouched there, eyes closed, letting the rain slide down her face and into her collar, heartbeat steady against her ribs. The forest around her felt bigger now, more alive, as if it had always been awake, always watching. She finally stood, tucked the bundle into her pack, then turned, and slowly made her way back down the hill. When she reached the fallen pine again, she paused, one last look at the twisted base, and there, lodged between the roots, half hidden beneath the earth, another small braid, this one older, frayed, but still whole. She didn't take it. She left it there, like a boundary stone, or a mark. Not everything was meant to be touched. Some things were just meant to be seen. She reached home before dusk, built the fire high, set the new braid on the mantel beside the others. She didn't cry. Not yet, but her hands shook when she made tea. Outside, the clouds parted just enough to let the last light touch the water. And somewhere out there, far beyond what she could see, a family moved through the forest. Not running, not hiding, but alive. And for the first time since the lake took her family, Lena didn't feel like the last one left. The ice was gone by mid-June. The lake breathed again, wide and glassy under a soft Idaho sun, with only a few thin trails of fog curling along its western edge each morning before they disappeared into the pines. Lena had stopped measuring time by calendar pages. These days, she counted by what came back: the red-winged blackbirds and the cattails, the sound of water dripping from dock pilings, the hum of bees in the rhubarb patch. She hadn't gone near the deeper coves since that winter, but something in her was stirring now. Not restlessness, more like readiness, as if the quiet that had once wrapped itself around her grief like a wool blanket had finally thinned enough to let the world back in. She packed a lunch, looped her old canteen to her belt, and carried the aluminum canoe down to the water's edge. It scraped softly across the sand, the bow dipping forward like it remembered the way. She didn't bring a fishing rod this time, just a notebook and the feather. By midday, the lake lay still as silver. Her paddle dipped rhythmically, sending rings out that glided across the mirrored surface like breath over glass. The trees along the far shore held still. No wind, just sun, just silence. She guided the canoe toward the eastern cliff, an old basalt face that jutted out like the broken jaw of some ancient thing buried beneath the earth. It was a place Earl had called Old Man Rock, because of how the shadows lined up like an eye and a long nose. Lena had always found it eerie, but beautiful. As the canoe drifted closer, something caught her eye. A groove in the rock face, not natural. She paddled gently to the side and let the current nudge her in. There, just above the waterline, etched deep into the black stone, two large handprints, side by side. Below them, faint but deliberate, footprints, not like human ones, wider. Shorter toes, but upright, balanced, and older than the season. Lichen had started to grow around the edges. She stared for a long time, then reached out and pressed her hand against the larger print. Didn't fit, not even close. But still, it felt familiar. She drifted back, let the canoe spin lazily in the cove's current, and stared up at the cliff as if waiting for it to speak. Later, as she was tying off near the dock, something in the reeds caught the light. A flash of color. She crouched. There, nestled between two flattened stalks, lay the three objects again. A feather, a piece of white-veined stone, a driftwood curve. But this time they weren't laid flat. They were stacked, balanced carefully, feather on wood, stone atop both. A new shape, a marker, not just a gift, a sign. She took them in both hands, tucked them gently into the folds of her jacket. That night she lit the fire early and placed the new formation on the mantel. Then she opened the notebook she hadn't touched since Earl passed. Wrote nothing, just let her fingers rest against the paper. It rained later, soft and slow, tapping like fingers on the windows. She watched it, didn't cry, didn't speak. But something inside her leaned forward again. A few days later, she hiked up to the overlook again, the same one that had once pointed her toward the break in the lake's surface. The one she thought she'd never climb after that first avalanche. She brought the feather, brought the stone, and this time, she brought something else too. A small rusted hook. It had surfaced in the shallows earlier that week, tangled in weeds near the edge of her dock. At first, she thought it was nothing, but when she washed it, her knees buckled. On the side, nearly rubbed smooth by years underwater, was a scratch. A tiny carving, R+B, Ruby Brookfield. She had scratched it herself into her father's tackle gear the summer she turned 10. Lena remembered the fight Earl and Ruby had when he found it. That was the same summer they bought the red canoe. The same canoe Lena had paddled that morning. She sat on the bluff for nearly an hour, holding the hook between her palms like a communion wafer. She didn't want to believe in signs, but she couldn't ignore this one. Someone or something had brought it back. From the depths. From somewhere. And it wasn't random. Later that evening, as she returned down the trail, she passed an older man crouched near the edge of the road. He was tying something to a walking stick. She nodded. He looked up. His face was weathered, deep creases, eyes pale and quiet. "You from around here?" he asked. She paused, then nodded again. He smiled faintly. "You hear the stories?" "Which ones?" she asked. He didn't answer, just stood, adjusted his pack. Then said, almost as an afterthought, "When I was a boy, they used to say the lost ones, the ones who wandered too far into the trees. weren't always taken. Some were kept. She frowned. Kept? He nodded. Not harmed, not killed, just looked after until they could come back or be found. He tipped his cap, then walked away, slow and steady down the path. She didn't follow, just stood there, heartbeat strangely loud in her ears. The fire burned late into the night. She sat near it, holding the old hook and watching the shadows move across the walls. Something about the old man's words clung to her. Could someone have saved Ruby? Not in the way Lena had begged for, not pulled from the water, but carried, protected, nurtured, until it was time. Was that even possible? She didn't know. But for the first time since that terrible day, she didn't feel completely sure it wasn't. That night, she dreamed of footprints. Not one set, but many. Winding up the cliffside, toward the overlook, where handprints glowed faintly in the moonlight, and a figure stood, tall and still, watching the lake. Not alone. Beside him, two smaller shapes, breathing, watching, waiting. The wind changed that September. Not in temperature yet, but in tone. The kind of change that came at the tail end of summer, when the lake went glassy and the pine needles stopped whispering, when the air hung too still. Lena noticed it on the second Monday of the month. Birds had stopped landing near the dock. The raccoons didn't come for the compost bin. Even the loons out on the far water kept their calls short, as if someone were listening who shouldn't. She heard the truck before she saw it. A low growl, tires grinding gravel, creeping slow down the road that most folks avoided unless they had business up this far. She stepped back behind the curtain. 3 men inside, out-of-state plates. The kind of truck with a winch and cage rack that didn't belong anywhere near a lake unless someone planned to drag something heavy out of it. They parked near the tree line. No one knocked. That night she didn't sleep. She watched from her porch, lights off, shotgun loaded but untouched. The men didn't camp at the ranger station like most hikers. They built their fire low and dug the pit tight. No talking, no beer cans. Just silence. One of them walked the perimeter with what looked like tripwires. Another climbed a tree and stayed there past midnight with a camera mounted on a steel rig. The third man whittled something by the fire. She saw it on the second night. A snare. Heavy gauge wire, looped thick with steel tension coils built for weight. Not coyotes, not deer, something bigger. She waited until they left for the ridge at dawn. Then she walked the site. She found 6 traps. 2 in the underbrush not 30 feet from her cabin. 1 along the deer trail that crossed the stream. Another near the flat rock where the bundles were left. The 4th was the worst. Buried, covered with moss. She tripped on it and nearly lost her footing. She disarmed them all. Left the wires in a pile at the edge of their camp. Waited with a stone. Didn't leave a note. That evening, just before dark, something slammed into the side of her house. She bolted upright. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the sound was too deep, too sudden. She grabbed her flashlight, stepped out with bare feet on the cold boards. The edge of her roof had been clawed, but not by an animal. 4 wooden spikes, sharpened and driven into the soil, stood in a row like broken teeth around the base of her porch. A message, not for her, for them. She didn't sleep again that night. Somewhere near midnight, the power blinked once, then again, then failed. Silence roared. She lit 3 lanterns and placed them around the house. The 4th she kept by her bed. At 3:17 a.m., something hit the western window. Not glass shattering, just a knock. 2 knocks, then silence. She waited. Then another knock. Slower, lower. She walked to the door, opened it without turning the knob. Just stood there and saw it, barely visible through the mist. A dark shape, massive, standing between her and the forest line. Not moving, not threatening, just present. Behind it, another form moved. Smaller, quicker. She recognized the outline. The child, both looking past her, toward the trees, where the truck waited, where the cameras blinked red beneath pine bark, where men believed monsters were just meat that hadn't been shot yet. She stepped back inside, didn't close the door, just left it open all night. The next morning, the air smelled of smoke. But no trees burned, just ash, bitter, from something man-made. She found the tripod first, snapped clean at the neck. Then the VHS camcorder. Crushed, lens shattered, still blinking. Further down, near the path to the ridge, she saw the tent, or what was left of it, split in two, poles bent like pipe cleaners. But no blood, no bodies, no signs of a fight, only absence. And one thing more. In the center of the camp, a circle, laid with pine needles. 3 feathers placed precisely at compass points. A stone in the middle, and wrapped around it, like a silent command, a single piece of braided reed. Tight, wound, fresh. She didn't move it, didn't touch the tent. She just turned and walked back toward the cabin. That evening, she swept the porch, noticed the line of wood someone had restacked along the front step. It hadn't been there that morning. A semicircle. Logs arranged shoulder height like a barrier. Atop the center beam, the 3 objects again. Feather, stone, driftwood. But something else too. Another shape. Woven from cattail. A ring. A complete loop. She sat beside it. Placed her hand on the wood. Felt the grain. Felt the pulse of something older than language. She didn't ask why. Didn't need to. That night the woods were quiet again. No engines. No lights. Just the long, slow breath of the forest returning. She went to bed with the door unlocked and dreamed of voices she didn't understand. Not English, not human, but low and rooted. Like the ground itself was humming something ancient, something holy. The first frost returned without warning, just after the first full moon of November. One morning, Lena opened the door to find the porch rimmed in silver, each step sugar-dusted and glinting like it had been dipped in stars. The lake lay still, not yet frozen, but quieter than it had been in weeks. The mist didn't rise that morning. It clung low to the ground, wrapping the trees in a gauze so thick they looked like ghosts. She moved slower now, not from age, but from awareness. Every gesture measured, every morning layered with meaning. The fire was lit earlier, the tea steeped longer, the windows were cleaned with care. She had begun writing again, not in the way of journaling, not therapy. This was record-keeping, memory-making, a map made out of moments no one else would believe. She wrote by hand, in a leather-bound notebook she had kept since the year Earl passed, between photographs of him and Ruby, between dried fern fronds and the first eagle feather. Each page held stories that weren't hers alone anymore. They belonged to something older, something borrowed from the woods. She wrote of what she'd seen, the handprints, the offerings, the figures that stood silent in the fog, the breath that hummed like music against the ice, the child that clung to his father's shoulder, the firewood wall, the camera crushed but untouched, the quiet that followed after the hunters never returned. She didn't name the creature. She never did. Not even on the page. Names were a human thing, she decided. Ownership disguised as understanding. This was different. She called him only Northwalker, the one who moved through trees like mist, who spoke without sound, who returned what had been lost without needing to be asked. That winter snow came late, but on the morning of December 10th, Lena woke before the sun and felt something shift in the air. It wasn't fear. It wasn't excitement. Just a knowing. She dressed in layers, made coffee she didn't drink, and stepped out into the early blue. The sky was low. The light was slate. She didn't need to guess where to go. Her boots moved on their own, down the trail behind the cabin, past the frozen edge of the stream, up toward the ridge where the old stone circle sat half buried in moss and memory. She hadn't walked this far since spring. Her knees ached. Her breath curled tight, but her feet didn't falter. When she reached the clearing, the fog had thinned just enough for light to slip through, and he was there, standing still. Not hiding, not waiting, just being taller than she remembered. Shoulders broader, arms long and resting at his sides. His fur carried snow like a cloak. Ice glistened in the folds of his neck. But he wasn't shivering. He didn't stand alone. To his right, a smaller shape. Child no longer. Now almost shoulder height, limbs longer, gaze steadier. They didn't move. Lena stepped forward once, then again. Slow, no sound. Her hand rested on her chest, just over her heart. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Instead, she lifted her hand, pressed it once, flat, to the center of her chest, then lowered it. A gesture of thanks. A farewell. A vow. He watched her, then looked down at the child beside him, placed one hand on the smaller shoulder, held it there, as if passing something. A memory, a charge, a story. Then together they stepped back, not hurried, not fading, just returning. The mist thickened as they walked, but she could still see them, until she couldn't. She stood there for a long time after, let the silence fold around her like a wool shawl. Then she turned, walked back down the ridge. By the time she reached her cabin, the sun had begun to rise, just a little, enough to catch on the frost that had bloomed across the window panes. She opened the door, lit the stove, set the kettle on the burner, then returned to her writing desk. There on the windowsill, 3 objects, laid carefully: feather, stone, driftwood, and beneath them, a loop of braided grass. The same shape she had once seen encircling her home, only this time, placed gently. No warning, no guard, just grace. She pressed her hand to the glass, watched the sky turn gold, and felt, for the first time since losing her family, that her story had not been taken. It had only been rewoven, thread by thread, by something wordless and kind. There are stories that don't need to be shouted. They don't arrive with fanfare or ask to be understood all at once. They live quietly, tucked into the edges of the world, in the stillness between trees, in the hush of snow, in the tremble of a hand held out with nothing to prove. This was one of those stories. A story not about what we see, but about what we choose to believe when no one else is looking. Because sometimes the most extraordinary things unfold when no one is trying to capture them. Not with cameras, not with words, just with presence, with patience, with open silence. It reminds us that kindness doesn't need an audience, that sometimes mercy moves on 2 legs or 4, or none at all, and wears no name we'd recognize. And when the world grows too loud, too cruel, too fast, there's still a kind of wisdom that lingers in the old places, in the forgotten woods, in the eyes of creatures that don't speak like we do, but who carry the weight of memory in every step. And maybe that's what healing truly is. Not a return to what was, but the slow creation of something that can live beside the loss. Something that doesn't fix the ache, but honors it. Gives it a place to rest. Allows it to transform into something else. Something brave and sacred, and profoundly quiet. Sometimes the path forward isn't paved. It isn't lit. It's barely there at all. But then something reaches out, not to pull us back, but to walk beside us just long enough for the forest to recognize our shape. And in those moments, however brief, we are reminded that we're not alone after all, that something ancient still watches, still remembers, still protects, even now, even here. If this story stirred something in you, if it whispered a truth you've been carrying quietly in your own heart, please take a moment to let us know. We'd be honored to hear what it meant to you. You're invited to share your thoughts below in the comments, or simply leave a word that describes what you felt. If you'd like to walk with us again, through stories like this, tender, mysterious, and full of the unspoken beauty that still exists in this world, we warmly welcome you to subscribe to the channel. Your presence here helps us build something gentle in a noisy world. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. We'll be waiting just beyond the tree line.